The planet Kepler 442b looked like hell had taken a vacation there and decided to stay. Everything was burnt, broken, and dead. The ground was covered with pieces of metal that used to be ships, weapons, and machines. Some of it was still smoking. The sky above was dark orange, like the world itself was bruised. Tom crouched down behind what used to be a transport vessel, basically a big metal container that could carry stuff across space. His suit was doing its job, filtering out the worst of the smoke so he could actually breathe and see. But no filter could make this place look any better. He'd seen a lot of bad things in his life, but battlefields never got easier to look at. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong, heavy, struggling, desperate. Tom pushed his helmet up just slightly and looked out across the wasteland. About 50 meters away through the haze and the smoke, something moved. Something huge. It was a war dog. That's what the Vexthar Empire called their creations. Not actually a dog in any way humans would recognize. This thing was massive, maybe 3 meters tall, with a body built like a tank made of black glass. Its hide, what the Vexthar had engineered it with, was this shiny obsidian color, the kind of black that seemed to absorb light. But right now, that perfect black was cracked and shattered. Deep fractures ran across its body like lightning strikes frozen in place. From those cracks, a bright blue fluid was leaking out, glowing faintly in the dim light. Tom knew what those cracks meant. The war dog was dying. The thing was trying to stand. Every time it moved, you could tell it hurt. A lot. Its movements were slow and jerky, like it was fighting against its own body. Tom had seen wounded soldiers before, had even helped a few, but there was something about watching something this powerful, this engineered to be a weapon, reduced to this state of pure pain that got to him. The Vexthar handlers, the ones who controlled these things, who used them in battle, they'd abandoned it. Tom had watched them pull back maybe 6 hours ago. The retreat order had come down and they just left. No hesitation, no second thought. When you're losing a battle, you don't waste resources trying to save something that's already damaged. That's military logic. That's how empires think. You cut your losses and move forward. The war dog didn't matter anymore. It was broken, so it was disposable. And it wasn't just the Vexthar who'd left it behind. Other species had passed by too. There were Kelthian scouts who'd come through the battlefield maybe 2 hours ago, looking for survivors and useful salvage. They'd seen the war dog. They just kept walking. There was a merchant coalition trader who'd shown up with a salvage crew about an hour ago. They'd taken some valuable materials from destroyed ships but never even approached the wounded creature. To everyone else, this was just another casualty of war. Another piece of the battlefield. Nothing worth saving. Nothing worth the effort. But Tom couldn't look away. The war dog tried to take a step forward and nearly fell. Its front leg buckled and Tom winced. That movement looked like it sent a shock of pure pain through the entire creature. But it kept trying. That was the thing that got to Tom. It kept trying to move, kept trying to survive, even though everything and everyone had already decided it was done. And then Tom saw the eyes. The war dog's eyes were different from the rest of its body. While most of it was this dark, imposing black, its eyes were bright. They were this pale green color, almost glowing. But more than that, and this was what really grabbed Tom, they were intelligent. Where? This wasn't just some animal running on instinct. This was something that understood what was happening. It knew it was alone. It knew it was hurt. It knew that no one was coming to help. Tom felt something twist in his chest. He knew what the protocol said. Leave it. Move on. You don't waste time on things that are already lost. The Vexthar had made sure these war dogs were expendable. That was kind of the point. You couldn't get attached to a weapon. You couldn't waste resources saving something that could be replaced. That's how war works. That's how empires survive. But as Tom watched that creature struggle, watched those intelligent eyes looking out at an empty battlefield, hoping for something that wasn't coming, he realized he didn't care about protocol right now. He didn't care about military logic or survival tactics. Somewhere in his gut, something was saying that leaving this thing to die alone felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Not wrong because of rules or regulations. Wrong because it was just cruel. Tom took a breath. He knew what he had to do. He knew it was probably stupid. But he started moving toward the war dog anyway. Dr. Rachel Meyer didn't want to touch it. Honestly, she was terrified of it. When Tom had brought the war dog to the colony's medical bay, half-conscious and bleeding that strange blue fluid everywhere, Rachel's first instinct had been to say no. Absolutely not. She was a doctor, yes, but she was a doctor for humans. She trained for years to understand human biology, human medicine, human problems. This thing was none of those things. This thing was a weapon. A creation of an alien empire designed to kill. And now it was lying on her medical bay table, taking up nearly half the room with its massive body, still sedated but still dangerous even unconscious. The colony council had made their position very clear. They'd called an emergency meeting the night Tom brought the creature in. Rachel had sat in that meeting listening to them argue about what to do with it. The consensus was pretty much unanimous. Destroy it. Put it down. Get it out of their colony before it wakes up and decides to kill everyone. Too dangerous, they said. Too unpredictable. Too much of a resource drain. The colony was struggling enough as it was. They didn't have medical supplies to waste on something that might turn on them the moment it regained consciousness. It made sense. From a practical standpoint, from a survival standpoint, it was the logical choice. But Rachel couldn't do it. She'd become a doctor because she believed in saving lives. That was the core of who she was. When she'd taken her oath years ago in a university auditorium back on Earth, she'd promised to do no harm and to help people who needed help. People. That was the word that kept getting stuck in her mind. The council kept saying, it, referring to the war dog as an object, a thing, a problem to be solved. But when Rachel looked at it, even sedated and helpless, she didn't see in it. She saw a being. Something alive. Something suffering. And she'd sworn an oath to help beings that were suffering. So she said no to the council. She told them she wouldn't do it. She told them that as the colony's chief medical officer, she had some say in what happened in her medical bay, and she wasn't going to execute a patient just because it was inconvenient. That decision did not make her popular. But Rachel had a stubborn streak, and once she'd made up her mind, nothing was going to change it. She started digging through every scrap of information the colony had about Vexthar biology. Old military files, salvaged data from destroyed ships, even some obscure scientific papers that had been published before the conflict started. She spent entire nights reading about the war dog's physiology, its genetics, how it was built, what it needed to survive. She cross-referenced everything with her own observations, checking the creature's vitals, analyzing samples of that blue fluid, trying to understand what was happening inside its body. The first week was the hardest. The war dog was still sedated, kept in a medical coma while Rachel tried to figure out what she was dealing with. But there was an infection setting in. Something about the alien environment, or maybe the way the creature's wounds had been exposed to Kepler 442b's atmosphere. Rachel recognized the signs. She'd seen infections kill patients before. She wasn't going to let that happen. She worked constantly. She'd be up at 3 in the morning, checking on the creature, adjusting medications, trying different antibiotics to see what would work on an alien immune system. She was essentially making it up as she went along, which would have terrified her if she'd had time to think about it. But she didn't have time. She just had work. Tom helped her. He'd show up in the medical bay at odd hours, carrying supplies she needed, bringing her coffee when she'd been working too long without sleep. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just understood that Rachel was trying to save something that everyone else had already written off as dead weight. He'd be the one keeping watch while she worked, making sure nobody from the council came in to try to convince her to just end it. They worked in silence most nights. Just the two of them, a doctor and a soldier, trying to keep alive something that their own people thought should be destroyed. It was defiant in a quiet way. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was just two people, night after night, refusing to give up on a life that nobody else thought was worth saving. Then came the night when the creature's body went rigid. Seizures. The infection had gotten into its nervous system. Rachel was there immediately, doing everything she could, hands moving with muscle memory and pure determination. Tom held the creature's massive head steady, talking to it in a low voice even though it couldn't hear him. "Come on," he kept saying. "Come on, stay with us." Rachel pushed the right medication, adjusted the oxygen, monitored everything she could. Minutes felt like hours. Then slowly the seizure stopped. The creature's body went still again. Its vitals stabilized. Rachel stepped back, breathing hard, covered in sweat and that strange blue fluid. Tom looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. But they both knew. They'd just crossed a line that there was no coming back from. This creature wasn't just a patient anymore. It was something they'd both chosen to fight for. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Rachel had been coming in early every day for weeks now, checking vitals, monitoring progress, adjusting treatments. She'd barely slept more than a few hours at a time in days. Her eyes were tired, her scrubs were stained with various fluids she didn't want to think too hard about, and she was running on coffee and pure stubbornness. But when she walked into the medical bay that morning, everything changed. The war dog's eyes were open. Not just open, actually aware. The creature's massive head was resting on the reinforced medical bed, and those pale green eyes were tracking her movement as she entered the room. Rachel froze. Every instinct screamed at her to be careful. This was still a weapon. This was still dangerous. But she forced herself to stay calm. She moved slowly, deliberately, like she was approaching something wild and frightened. Because that's what this was. A frightened animal waking up in a strange place surrounded by strange creatures. "Hey," Rachel said softly. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe." She had no idea if the creature could understand her words. Probably not. But her tone of voice, that was something different. That was something that could transcend species, maybe. The gentleness in it. The lack of threat. Rachel had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She'd engineered a nutrient paste specifically designed for the war dog's biology. Something that would give it energy, help it recover, support its immune system as it fought off the remaining infection. It was mostly guesswork, but it was educated guesswork, and it was the best she had. She held up a small container of the paste, showing it to the creature. "I know you don't know what this is," she said, still speaking in that soft voice. "But you need to eat. You've been through a lot." She approached the bed slowly, giving the creature every opportunity to react badly if it wanted to. But it didn't. The war dog's eyes just followed her, watching. Rachel carefully applied some of the paste to a specialized feeding apparatus she'd created. The creature's nostrils flared. It was smelling it, analyzing it, deciding if this was a threat or not. Then it opened its mouth just slightly. Rachel held her breath. She brought the feeding apparatus closer and the creature ate. It actually ate. The paste disappeared into its mouth, and Rachel could see the muscles in its throat working as it swallowed. She felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. It was eating. It was accepting food from her. That was a start. Over the next few days, something shifted. The creature was waking up more, staying conscious for longer periods. It was still weak, obviously still recovering from massive injuries, but it was alive. It was fighting. And Rachel was there for all of it. Tom started coming to the medical bay more regularly. He'd come by in the evenings after his shifts were done, and he'd just sit in the corner of the room. He wouldn't do much, just sit quietly, speaking in low tones about random things. He'd talk about his family back on Earth, about growing up near the ocean, about movies he'd watched, about nothing in particular. Rachel wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe he thought the sound of a human voice would help. Maybe he just wanted to keep her company during those long evenings. Whatever the reason, the creature seemed to respond to it. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, gradually, the war dog's body healed. The fractures in its obsidian hide began to close over. The blue fluid stopped leaking. Color returned to those pale green eyes. And something else happened too, something Rachel hadn't expected. The creature started to anticipate things. It would recognize the sound of her footsteps in the corridor outside the medical bay, and it would make this low rumbling sound. Not aggressive. Not threatening. It almost sounded like purring? Or maybe recognition. Welcome. One evening, about 3 weeks into the creature's recovery, Tom was sitting in his usual corner. Rachel was running some final checks on the war dog's vitals. The creature was much stronger now. It could move around the medical bay without assistance, though it was still taking things slow. Tom looked at the creature for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "We're gonna call you Duke." It was such a simple thing. Just a name. But when Tom said it, the war dog's ears, these small vestigial things on the top of its head that the Vex Thar had left as evolutionary remnants, actually perked up. The creature turned to look at Tom, those green eyes focusing on him. Rachel smiled despite her exhaustion. "Duke," she repeated softly, testing the name out. "Yeah, that works." Over the next few days, the name stuck. Every time someone called Duke, the creature responded. It would turn, acknowledge them, make that low rumbling sound. And something had changed in the way it interacted with them. It wasn't just accepting food and medical treatment anymore. It was choosing to be around them. It was choosing to respond to them. There was intelligence there, yes, but there was also something else. Something that looked a lot like trust. Rachel realized what was happening. The war dog wasn't just recovering physically. It was learning. Learning that humans could be kind. Learning that not all touch was violence. Learning that being cared for didn't have to come with strings attached or hidden threats. Duke was learning what safety felt like. More than that, Duke seemed to understand what the name meant. When Tom or Rachel called him Duke, the creature responded not just physically but emotionally. It was like being called by that name meant something. It meant belonging. It meant being seen as something more than a weapon, more than a casualty of war. It meant being part of something. Being part of their lives. And for the first time since they'd brought the wounded creature to their colony, Rachel felt like what they were doing might actually matter. The message came through the colony's communication system on a Thursday morning. Formal. Official. Cold. A Vexthar ambassador would be arriving at the settlement within 24 hours. The message didn't say why, but everyone knew. Word had gotten out about what Rachel and Tom had done. About the war dog they'd saved. About Duke. The colony council called an emergency meeting. Rachel wasn't supposed to be there, but Tom insisted she come. They sat in the main hall around a long metal table, while various council members argued about what this meant. Some were panicking. Others seemed almost relieved, like maybe the Vexthar would solve their problem for them by just taking Duke away. Rachel sat quietly, her hands clenched together under the table, listening to these people she'd lived with for 2 years debate the fate of a creature she'd spent weeks fighting to save. The colony administrator, a woman named Patricia who usually made reasonable decisions, pulled out a document. According to Vexthar military code, she read out loud, any war dog classified as combat equipment remains the property of the Vexthar Empire, regardless of circumstances. The document states that compensation will be provided for any salvage and care rendered. Collection will be immediate upon arrival of authorized personnel. Immediate. That word hung in the air like a threat. Tom stood up. We're not handing Duke over, he said flatly. We don't have a choice, Patricia replied not unkindly. This isn't about what we want. This is about not starting a conflict with a military power that could destroy this colony in hours if they wanted to. We saved the creature. That was good. But now we have to accept reality. Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew Patricia was right from a practical standpoint. The Vexthar Empire was vast and powerful. The colony was small and vulnerable. They had no leverage, no way to fight back. Duke was military property. The law was clear. And the law in space was usually enforced by whoever had the biggest weapons. But none of that changed the fact that it felt wrong. The Vexthar ambassador arrived the next day in a sleek black ship that looked like a predator. Rachel watched it land from the observation deck, her heart sinking with every meter it descended. The ambassador disembarked with 6 guards, tall, imposing figures in armor that looked like it was made of the same material as Duke's hide. They moved with military precision like they were programmed to be efficient. Because, in a way, they probably were. The Vexthar didn't leave much to chance. The ambassador was a tall figure, even by Vexthar standards. Its skin had that same obsidian quality as Duke's, but it was unmarked, perfect, unblemished. It looked at the humans gathered to receive them with something that might have been contempt. This was a being that saw itself as superior. And why wouldn't it? The Vexthar had an empire. Humans had a struggling colony on an alien world. The war dog, the ambassador said, its voice carrying a strange harmonic quality. Take us to it. Patricia gestured for them to follow. Rachel walked alongside Tom and she could feel him tensing. They led the Vexthar group toward the medical bay where Duke was resting. Rachel had made sure to keep the door locked, had told Duke to stay calm, had done everything she could to prepare for this moment. But nothing could really prepare you for this. The council members were supposed to stay in the main hall, but Rachel and Tom were allowed to accompany the Vexthar. The ambassador wanted to see the creature, verify its condition, confirm that it was indeed their property and that it was intact enough to be worth retrieving. They reached the medical bay doors. Rachel punched in her security code and the doors slid open. Duke was lying on the reinforced bed just like always. But the moment the Vexthar entered, something changed. Rachel saw it happen, saw Duke's body tense, saw its eyes go from calm to alert. The creature recognized them. Recognized what they were. The guards that had once commanded it. The empire that had used it as a tool. The ambassador stepped forward and Rachel heard it make a sound, a clicking harmonic sound that was clearly some kind of command in the Vexthar language. Duke didn't move. The ambassador made the sound again, sharper this time. More demanding. Rachel's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was the moment. This was where Duke would either return to being what it had been programmed to be, or where it would choose something different. The guards began to approach the medical bed. They moved with that same efficient military precision, reaching out to secure the creature, to prepare it for transport. And that's when Duke moved. It wasn't an attack. It didn't lunge at them or try to bite them or do any of the violent things that a war dog was trained to do. Instead, Duke simply stood up, slowly, deliberately, and positioned itself between the guards and Rachel and Tom. The creature's massive body was now blocking the humans from the Vexthar soldiers. A barrier. A choice. A low growl rumbled through the medical bay. Not aggressive. Not threatening in the way a weapon's growl would be. This was something different. This was a statement. A refusal. The ambassador made a sound that might have been surprise. Or maybe anger. It was hard to tell with alien expressions. The guards hesitated, looking at the creature they had once controlled, clearly confused by its behavior. Duke, Rachel said softly, and the creature's ears perked up at the sound of its name. It turned its head slightly to look back at her, maintaining its position between them and the Vexthar. The ambassador looked at the war dog. Then it looked at Tom. Then it looked at Rachel. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Duke's low, constant growl, not a threat, just a presence. Just a being saying that it had made a choice and this was where it stood. The Vexthar ambassador stood there for what felt like an eternity. The guards waited for orders. Duke didn't move. Rachel barely breathed. Then, without a word, the ambassador turned and walked back out of the medical bay. The guards followed. The entire confrontation lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours had passed. Nobody tried to stop them. Nobody said anything. The Vexthar simply left, back to their ship, back to their empire, leaving behind the weapon they'd come to retrieve. They left Duke behind. When the ship lifted off and disappeared into the sky, Rachel felt like she could finally breathe again. Tom reached out and placed his hand on Duke's massive head. The creature made that soft rumbling sound, the one that meant contentment, meant trust, meant home. "You did it," Tom whispered. "You chose." Within a week, the story had spread. It moved through the colony first, then to the other human settlements on Kepler 442b, then outward to the space stations and outposts scattered across the sector. Humans had saved a war dog that the Vexthar had abandoned. The creature had chosen to stay with them rather than return to its original handlers. It was the kind of story that people talked about, that made them feel something. That made them believe in something beyond just survival and profit. But the story didn't stop there. It kept spreading. Across colony networks. Through trade routes. Into places where different species interacted and shared information. And everywhere it went, the reaction was similar. People started asking questions. How had Rachel managed to heal an alien war dog? What were the medical techniques? The biological principles? Other species began reaching out to the colony, requesting information, asking if Rachel would share her research. Rachel had spent so long working in secret, afraid that what she was doing would be shut down. Now she found herself suddenly in demand. Researchers from Kelthian settlements wanted to know about her treatment methods. A merchant coalition scientist requested access to her notes. Even some Vexthar defectors, soldiers and scientists who had grown tired of the Empire's endless wars, began making contact, wanting to learn about compassion-based healing instead of the violence-based logic their own people had taught them. Rachel started publishing her findings. Not in secret anymore. Not hidden away in the medical bay. She put together detailed reports about Duke's physiology, about how to treat injuries on Vexthar war dogs, about the biological principles that could help other species understand creatures they'd previously only known as enemies. It was research that challenged the basic assumption that had driven so many conflicts. The idea that some things were simply too dangerous or too alien to be worth saving. Tom, meanwhile, had been given an unofficial role. The colony needed patrols, people to watch the perimeter, make sure nothing dangerous approached. Tom started taking Duke on these patrols. The creature was fully healed now, strong and alert, but it wasn't the mindless weapon it had once been. It moved with purpose, with awareness, but also with something that looked like contentment. It was protecting the place where it had learned to be safe. Protecting the people who had saved it. They'd walk the outer edges of the settlement in the early morning, before the heat of the day set in. Duke would move alongside Tom, its massive body a reassuring presence. Other colonists would see them and smile. There was something about the sight of a human and a former war dog walking together that just made people believe things could be different. That enemies could become friends. That violence didn't have to be the only language. The settlement changed. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. People started treating other species with more caution but also more openness. If humans could save a war dog, maybe there was more common ground with other beings than anyone had previously thought. Maybe it was worth trying to understand instead of just assuming the worst. Trade relationships improved. Conflicts that had seemed inevitable started getting resolved through negotiation instead of force. Duke became something like an ambassador, though not in any official capacity. The creature didn't wear any special title or uniform. It was just Duke, a being that had once been a weapon and was now something else entirely. Something that had chosen kindness over control. That had learned to trust. That had been saved and had, in turn, saved something in the hearts of the people around it. Every morning Rachel and Tom would go to check on Duke. It was part of their routine now, as much a part of the day as eating or sleeping. They'd opened the door to the medical bay, which had stopped being just a medical facility and had become more like Duke's home, a sanctuary where the creature could rest and be safe, and Duke would be there waiting for them. The creature would stand up, ears perking at the sound of their footsteps. It would make that soft rumbling sound, and its eyes would light up with recognition and something that looked an awful lot like happiness. Rachel would place her hand on Duke's head, and Tom would stand beside them both, and for a moment, everything would feel right. This was loyalty. Not the kind that was programmed into a being's DNA by scientists in a laboratory. Not the kind that came from fear or conditioning or the threat of punishment. This was loyalty that came from choice. Loyalty that came from being valued. Loyalty that came from being saved and understanding what that meant. Understanding that someone had looked at you when you were broken and dying, and instead of walking away like everyone else, they'd decided you were worth fighting for. Duke wasn't a war dog anymore. It was proof. Proof that redemption existed. Proof that compassion had power. Proof that being saved could transform you into something that wanted to protect and care for those who had cared for you. Every dawn, when the sun rose over the colony, Duke was there, waiting loyal home. And in that simple moment, every struggle, every risk, every time Rachel and Tom had defied the council and protocol and common sense, all of it was worth it.